It's often overlooked that most forms of value are fundamentally very human and social in nature. So today, we thought it would be fun to have a look at money from an anthropological perspective. You don't have a spiritual moment with it every day?
I'm a product of the 1990s rape scene. I took a lot of risks.
Because someone is a big spender does not mean they are rich.
Paid $5 for this? What the heck? We're the Golden State too.
Kind of buck the whole system.
My mom calls my dad a cheapskate.
Oh, no.
Always live below your means.
Wars are inflationary.
It feels wrong. It's just so tempting, isn't it?
Puts them closer to their God.
All right, Paco, thank you so much for coming out. I love the conversations we've had over the years, and talking about money is one of the most fascinating things around. But usually it's in terms of just American dollars or in the history of America, or it's political in the frame of the United States. But it's so much bigger than that when you think about how value interacts across the world. So maybe today you could just explain, why is it important to see money through the eyes of the cultural history of a country, in addition to thinking of it as, a bookkeeping or mathematics?
Looking at money through the eyes of different cultures is very important to really understanding how we interact with it globally, especially in a globalized world.
Right. Everything's all connected.
Everything is interconnected. Everything is, we can't, the way we live our lives today is through how we interact with money, but also it's very important of understanding how money is seen in other cultures. One of the best examples is the Chinese culture.
Okay. China
is a great example, and a lot of Asian countries are really good examples of how they see money and they see the value of things like gold and silver and precious metals, and how they interact with money, especially during the Spring Festival, which is this huge, it's the largest migration of people over a 2-week period of time. Every spring, at the beginning of the year, people travel, to their homes. You're talking about 100 million people moving across China or more. Wow. Trying to get to to celebrate. I mean, the country shuts down for 2 weeks, and so they celebrate Chinese New Year. They're really getting into the Spring Festival, celebrating change, the growth. But they also celebrate money. This is an important time of the year, very auspicious time of the year for them. And so the celebration of, red and gold, how gold plays a major part in their culture.
So it's okay for them to flaunt money.
They celebrate it. I mean, the Chinese have a lot of gods and goddesses, and one of their most important god is Kai-Shen, who is the god of wealth. And so they're giving away. They have something called hell money. They put in the mouth of the dragons and during the lion dance. They also burn money.
Wow.
And to give money to the spirits. They also, what else? I mean, there's so much that they do.
Whoa. So it's like a polytheistic culture. And so there's multiple gods, but then you're saying some of them represent different things, and some of them, in particular, with money, make it okay to kind of talk about money in terms of that religious connection.
The Chinese in particular have a very interesting relationship with gambling and games of chance. And here in Las Vegas, what's fascinating, and we've been rolling out the red and gold carpet for Asian tourists since the early 1980s. You can go anywhere on the Strip today and see how the hotels decorate the resorts for Chinese New Year.
They definitely can.
And a big shout out to all us tigers. This is the year of the tiger, which is my year.
Good.
That's me too.
And so,
nice.
It's it's really amazing what we've done here in Las Vegas. There's a very famous temple out in Caesar's Palace, and it's a Brahmin temple, and it's a beautiful shrine out there that, gamblers, serious gamblers, the whales that come out to the, whales are those high rollers, right? And so they're okay with spending $20 million a roll of dice, or more. And you'll go out there, especially during the Spring Festival or Chinese New Year, you'll see, incense burning constantly, people praying out there. And it is a very, very sacred place. And it's really fascinating to see how Asian cultures really embrace gambling and games of chance.
Is there a lot of comfort with like the possibility of losing that money too? Like, is that seen as like a really bad thing?
Aspect?
Like, say they do, lose $1 million. Is that like a really bad sign, or is that just kind of like, oh, it's part of the celebration?
It could be a bad sign. It could be the spirits are angry. Something's not right in the in the universe.
So bankruptcy might not look like a failure of the human spirit. It might seem like something beyond their control. If they start a business and they go bankrupt.
Bankruptcy is interesting because, in the United States, we're okay with giving people a second chance. And as someone who has gone through bankruptcy before, being able to have that, knowing that I won't be sent to a debtor's prison like we would in
do they do
Europe.
that in China?
No, they don't do that in China.
But there are parts of the world where you
different.
don't get to go
200
bankrupt.
years ago, if you lived in Europe, you would be sent to a debtor's prison.
Yeah, that's true. They'd be like,
they'd take everything that you had.
Yeah.
So the old adage or the old cartoon with the guy wearing the barrel, that was a thing. So when they would take everything, they'd take the shirt off your back.
Yeah. So maybe for a baseline, we could talk about our relationship with money. So I guess I'll start with Ashley. Like when you and your family are together, how is money talked about? Is it something that you avoid or you talk freely about, or is it usually expectations and that's the only light that it's seen under? Or
my family, we talk pretty openly about money. At least my parents and I, they taught me very early to be like a saver and an investor, and that, when you get money, you don't just spend it. Like you plan for it. Like you have some saved for fun, but also for just in case. So there's like a lot of different ways money should be used and saved for.
So do you feel a pressure when you're around them?
They do check. I just had an MBA. I just got my MBA, and I didn't have to go into debt for that. Thank you. And they were obviously very proud of me for that reason. And that's kind of what they would expected, though. That was kind of like, you save for that. Like it was never, it was like save for it ahead of time. Don't, get loans. And that's most people use loans, and that's kind of like the norm. But for my family's kind of like save up beforehand,
right? Very
and then
smart,
pay. Then you don't have to pay more for it later. Like anything we can do to not pay interest is like when I got my first car, I paid in cash. I didn't want to pay any interest.
You're like,
so it's kind of like you save up and then you get it. It's always been like, that's how I was taught. And I think that's how my parents always were. So,
And because you work in finance, and is that what you and your friends tend to talk about too? Or do you kind of avoid it?
My friends and I will talk about money, but it's not really how much we spend. I have a group of friends, and also because we are females and females, we don't make as much per dollar. That's just how it is. So we would sometimes be like, hey, like I just got a raise, or I'm looking to get a raise. Like, what did you do? Like we're in pretty similar, spots in our career and in finance. So you'd expect we'd make around the same. So when we hear like one girl is making less, we're like, oh, like you should be making more. Like we want to help each other. We want to support each other to make as much as we deserve and that we earn. So when I got a raise recently, like I shared that with my friends because I know they would celebrate it just along with me. It's not a competition ever. Yeah. And just because I was also taught growing up that just because someone is a big spender does not mean they are rich. Like there's a very different, that's just showing your wealth, and like my family, we were upper middle class, but we lived middle class. We lived below our means. Always live below your means is what I was taught.
Padding and stuff in there. Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm just curious, what was the relationship with money in your family growing up?
Well, probably the best lesson I ever learned with money happened in 1988 when I was traveling to Argentina, where my family's from. And Argentina has been an economic basket case for over 100 years. And it really has to do with just, how in 1900 Argentina was the richest country in the world. And today it's one of the worst countries, worst economies in the world. They can't figure it all out. They have a failed democracy, but they're still surviving, which is the strangest thing. And it was in 1988 when I flew to Argentina for the very first time. I was 14 years old. And my parents, by this time, were already separated and divorced. And we went to the airport, and my mother says to my father, give your son money so he has to spend in Argentina. And my father pulled out of his wallet a $50 bill, which, $50 bills are not necessarily, they're not as circulated as much as 100 or 20, right? Mm-hmm. And I was going for 3 months. Argentina during our summer is their winter, so June, July, and August. Mm-hmm. First of all, my mom calls my dad a cheapskate. He says, "How can you only give him $50?" She said, listen to me. Don't spend that money until the week before you get back. I said, when you get to Argentina, you give your aunt that money, go put it away, and don't spend it until the week before you leave. Argentina was going through hyperinflation at the time.
Oh, so not a lesson in savings, but a lesson in money changing between currencies.
The dollar, $1 to the Argentinian austral, as it was called then. Now they have the Argentinian peso.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
it just became
literally in 3 months.
Many more over the...
It just quadrupled in value over a very long time. Yeah, and the week before I left, I was able to buy a ton of stuff. I had to bring another suitcase with me. I mean, it was crazy.
Your money was
$50
increasing in value and increasing in value
every day, exponentially, because that's hyperinflation. And that was my first lesson in inflation.
That's a scary thing.
And when I went back to Argentina with my father in 2007, the same thing. I couldn't believe what $1 could buy you in Argentina. I mean, $9, we were with a bottle of wine, a steak dinner, dessert, and for $9.
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane.
So I guess countries that have gone through hyperinflation probably have a different relationship with money. Maybe they're less likely to have debt or something like that, do you think?
Germany's probably the best example of a country going through a major hyperinflation.
Because it's in the memory of the people who are in government.
Well, and the reason why Germany went through such a hyperinflation in the early 1920s was because of the reparations they had to pay back after World War I.
Yeah.
The agreements that they had to, with England and France and all the Allied powers, I mean, they literally drained Germany of all of its capacity.
So part of losing the war is that you end up in debt.
They had to pay back all war reparations to all those countries.
So then you print more money to pay it back,
and
then it becomes
did.
more inflated.
Yeah.
So you basically destroy your money to pay everyone back.
Exactly.
And then start over or something.
And that's where the Allies failed, is that they set up Germany for failure, which caused the rise of fascism later on in its history.
Wow.
Within
So
15 years.
if you could rewind time, you would have said that you would have let them not pay debt or something like that?
I wouldn't have been so harsh.
Okay.
I wouldn't have been so harsh. And it's going to be very...
You want them to pay something for starting a war.
World War I was very expensive. And, literally the Allies forced Germany to pay the cost back. And literally they had to divide Germany. I mean, the French took over part of Germany, the industrial heartland. Everything that the Germans produced as far as industry had to go to the French. I mean, it was set up for failure. And that's unfortunately what caused the rise of Adolf Hitler and fascism. And it was literally caused World War II.
Because we're going through some inflation in America, but you wouldn't call it hyperinflation until it hits some number where it's out of control, I guess?
Interesting
Is that how you think about
point. A friend of mine, we're doing a project in Alaska, an art project with a local artist, and we're going up there, and we began doing the calculations for the material costs. And we realized that our budget from the previous year does not match what the costs are today. And so there has been a considerable increase in material costs and travel expenses and things like that. And he asks me, he said, because this is a public art project and the budget is finite, you cannot go over a budget, especially for a government project. And he asked me, he says, is there any way we can increase this? I said, there's no way. And he says, there's no precedent. And I said, not since I was born in 1974 have we had a similar inflationary episode.
Wow.
I mean, and not in my lifetime. I mean, I was a baby when the last time we had inflation like this. One of the challenges that I think, when you look at money historically, from the time the Egyptians were using pieces of gold and silver, I mean, there's a finite amount of this precious material metal out there, and it's the perfect money. It's real money that can be exchanged. It's fungible. It's divisible. You can gold in one place is the same amount.
And it's immune from inflation because you can't dig it up unless you start digging it up faster and faster with technology.
Or you debase the currency. So
which is what we did.
We've debased it absolutely by printing more or not having enough gold in reserves.
Yeah.
And it was the French who called us out back in the 1960s. But ultimately, I mean, the Romans started debasing their currency by putting copper inside of the gold. And they could produce more coins for the finite amount of gold that existed.
Because I was going to say, why would they do that? Because it ruins their currency. But obviously they do it because it's more money without the work.
Right. And there's
who doesn't want to be able to spend more than they have?
Well, and the Romans, for Rome to maintain the empire, they had to continue their conquest so that they could get more land, more nations, more gold, and pay. Everyone had to pay a tribute to the capital, which was Rome, right?
Yeah.
So it was very interesting to see how you look at other cultures and how they've based their currency. It happened with the Greeks. It happened with the Romans. It happened with.
Has it ever happened without war being paying for war being the primary reason?
Wars are inflationary. They're very costly.
But if you can stay out of war, do you not ever inflate your money to death?
Gold actually keeps you from making war because there's only so much gold out there.
Statement. Yeah. Got the gold bug. Yeah. Okay.
So
you think we might not have gone to Iraq if America had stayed on the gold standard?
Or Vietnam. Or the space race.
Oh.
Or space race was definitely good, though, right?
I mean, think of if you look at what was happening in the 1950s and 60s. So Brettonwoods is a perfect example. Why did Brettonwoods happen in 1944? The rest of the world was broke. We were now the superpower. We won the war with our help. I mean, the Russians, when we look at the Russians and how they celebrate on June 9th, the history of them winning over the Nazis, it was thanks to the Americans sending them supplies through Murmansk. There was part of this whole war effort. The U.S. was not being attacked. We were being attacked in other areas, but the mainland was not being attacked. Right. And so our government literally said everyone is going to be part of the war effort. Women are going to get into the factories. Men are going to go fight. They got everyone involved. And our war effort put the entire country on a war footing. So by 1944, we had to figure out what the world monetary system was going to be like. And so they went to Brettonwoods. They all met.
Brettonwoods is a meeting.
It's a meeting in Brettonwoods, Connecticut.
And it's also a document.
Or it's an
agreement. It's an agreement.
It was an agreement. So
it's like a peace treaty or something, but it's just an agreement about money.
It was a way of getting all the countries to send the United States their gold. The United States would then reimburse those countries with dollars. So the U.S. would hold the gold. We would produce enough dollars so that there would be the convertibility of gold to dollars. Right. The problem is that we began printing more dollars than there was gold at Fort Knox.
Right.
Okay.
And all the countries that gave us their gold for us to hold.
It's just so tempting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
To be like, it's in the vault. Here's some more cash.
It was the French that figured out, said, wait a minute, how are you guys having the great, society of the 1960s, the space race against Russia, the war in Vietnam?
They're trying to piece that together.
And the French were the ones who said, look, we're going to come and get our gold. And so they sent 2 battleships to New York Harbor and they got their gold back.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
we let them fly to or sail 2 battleships into the harbor. I mean, because we're friendly.
No, it was all planned out. The French were going to attack us.
Okay.
I
know, but we're just saying, but just to come get their gold.
Yeah.
Because you don't just mail
we want our gold
obviously.
back. They said we want our gold back.
I thought you just put it in a plane or something, but yeah.
And
that's a good way. No, it's a good way to move gold. I guess that much gold is a warship. Yeah.
Well, and you need a warship that can hold all that gold, right? Because gold is heavy, it's dense.
Yeah, you're right. You don't just fly it.
And again,
did they get it all from us?
They did, absolutely. They came and got it. And it was interesting about the French during World War II. They shipped all their gold to Canada.
Really?
And the British were upset. They were like, no, you need to use that to buy arms and all that. They were like, well, we've already been invaded by the Nazis. We need, that money to rebuild our country after the war.
Smart.
That is smart.
Oh.
So they were very, very smart about, their use of gold.
Dude, that's
also,
interesting, yeah.
Something very interesting about the French and something quite valuable was when the Nazis showed up in Paris and they went to the Louvre and they noticed all the paintings were gone, all the art was gone, and the French they left all the frames. But all the artwork was gone. And so, the French knew, they said, okay, we can't fight the Nazis. We know they're going to come and take over most of the country. But what can we do to sustain our culture after that? Okay, let's ship our gold to Canada. Let's put our art away, and let's do an underground resistance. And that's the thing that they were able to do.
So what about India? I know they have like a really interesting relationship with gold as well.
The Indians are the largest buyers of gold in the world. And for them, it's deeply rooted in their culture. And very similar to the Chinese, they give gold away as a gift during weddings. So that's very, very important. There's even interesting programs. Even the poorest in India will, save up money so that they can buy even fractional pieces of gold, so that they have it available for the weddings and for special events. And it's part of the dowries. A lot of times, gold is part of a dowry for the brides.
Right. And can you use that as a currency there, though? Like, could you just go to, the car dealership and be like, oh, I have 3 pieces of gold? Or do they have to convert it into their...
They have to convert it.
Okay.
But there's a very famous temple in India that they claim, or it has been made a claim, that there is... more gold in this temple than any other temple in the world, and it's because it's given as a gift and homage to the hundreds of thousands of gods that they have.
Okay.
And so the Indians have a very, very, very special, close relationship with gold. And a lot of people, you'll see, Indians, when they come and visit Las Vegas, and they wear a gold that's very yellow. Not like Americans that we buy, 14 or 18
How is it
karat.
yellow? What makes it more yellow?
It's pure.
It's more pure.
The more pure the gold.
It's softer too, I would imagine.
And more soft. Yeah. 22 karat gold is about the most you want to wear.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very soft. Also, there's the Golden Temple in Amritsar in India. Very famous temple, very sacred space for the Sikh. And so, again, very, very close relationship. They love their gold and they wear it well. And so when you go to weddings, Indian weddings, or you see a lot of Indian visitors. Interestingly enough, India is one of our largest trading partners for the state of Nevada.
I didn't know.
Our largest trading partner is Switzerland.
Oh, I would have thought. Oh,
yeah.
And ask me why.
Watches or something? I don't know.
Why?
Nevada is the largest producer of gold in the United States.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know we had the silver state or something. I know
we are the silver state,
but I didn't know we had the gold state.
We're the golden state too.
We look at gold through the eyes of the Incan Empire, for instance. Gold was seen as, or and still is, to a certain segment of the culture that still exists down there, is seen as the rays of the sun, and so it's sacred at that point. And when the supreme Inca, who was in that case would have been Atahualpa. Atahualpa was the last of Incan kings, and he was known as the Inca. And the Inca, he owned all the gold. All the gold that existed in the Incan Empire was under his purview. Wow. Now, you could use it, but they didn't really use it as a currency. They used it for sacred purposes.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the Spanish arrived that they saw, especially Hernán Cortés, when he arrived in Tenochtitlan in central Mexico, that he saw all the gold and saw all the silver. And the same thing with Pizarro when he arrived in Cajamarca, which is where the great battle happened between the Spanish. 300 Spanish soldiers against 60,000 Incan, soldiers. Yeah. And so, Pizarro said, I want the gold. And so Atahualpa gave him, he filled 2 rooms. As the annals are said, they filled 2 rooms with gold and 1 room, or 1 room with gold and 2 rooms with silver, but as a ransom to save his life. Mm-hmm. And they still killed him. The amount of gold and silver they were pulling out of the Americas, was so inflationary in Europe. They flooded the European market with so much gold.
Because they just never anticipated, the market never anticipated digging up that much. So then when it showed up from another country, it messed with their economy's balance.
And something that isn't understood a lot. Now, people like me, we read a lot. I mean, we're anthropologists are constantly digging and finding and trying to figure out what makes a culture tick. And what was Spain like in 1492 when Columbus sailed west? They were just wrapping up the reconquista, the reconquest of Spain. So they were battle hardened. They were kicking the Moors and the Jews out of Spain. And let me tell you, when they told the Moors, which were the Muslims, and the Jews, they said, you either convert to Catholicism, and this was during the Inquisition, and they said, you either convert to Catholicism or you leave. Oh, and by the way, you can't take anything with you. So they would put them in boats, and they crossed over to North Africa, Morocco, what is now Morocco.
Okay.
And so the Spanish were pretty brutal. And so what they did to the Jews and to the Muslims and other non-Catholics, because remember, at that time, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon married. They were known as the Catholic monarchs of Spain. They got married and, as a united force to reconquer the Iberian Peninsula for the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And so, and they did it with the Inquisition. So you had the church encouraging this. And if you're not Christian, you were screwed royally. You literally,
Yeah.
And what are they going to do? They're going to send Christopher Columbus, who isn't even Spanish, he was Italian. And they were going to send him. And, they're going to rape, they're going to destroy, they're going to steal. And everything that the Spanish did to the Jews and the Muslims in Spain, they did to the Native Americans. And they did it to Atahualpa in the Incan Empire, and they did it to Moctezuma II in Tenochtitlan. And they continued doing it, and continued raping the land, stealing from the natives just so that they could, have their empire. And the Portuguese did it. And Europe just did that because they knew there was a lot of treasures out there. And the reality is, again, now we're going to look at historically, there was the Silk Road. And the Silk Road was this connection between the Roman Empire and the Han Chinese. And it wasn't until the rise of the Ottoman Empire that they shut down the Silk Road, and the Europeans had to find a way to the east. And so Christopher Columbus goes to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand and said, if we go west, instead of attempting to go around Africa, which was really pretty much controlled by either the Dutch or the Portuguese, and if we go west, maybe we have a quicker route. What they didn't know is they would run into an entire new continent.
Right.
El Nuevo Mundo, the New World, right?
Yep.
And we have, that again, Europeans' relationship with money.
Yep.
And it was what was sacred to Native Americans was really used for war among the Europeans.
Well, since territories now don't change quite as much as they did in the early days because we have just kind of more connected world, does that mean currencies are safer or more stable? Or is that the wrong way to look at stability? Does it mean we're not going to discover a new world on accident anymore?
It's true.
Unless you mine an asteroid, though, which could throw something off. Yeah,
we're finding new currencies all the time. Still, I feel. I mean, cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
that's kind of like
inventing.
We're just inventing.
Oh, you're
things.
right. No, this is a dumb question because obviously the world's gonna fluctuate.
I feel like I'm so curious to see what we'll invent in another 100 years. Like, what will be the new currency?
Because you're so right. Then. If we can invent Ashley coin and there can be a million of them, and all of a sudden they're added to an economy where you trade them with dollars, it's just the same as finding a new country.
Right, because it's just what someone places value on. Like, it just happened to be gold, or it just happened to be there's a lot of other finite things in the world,
Yeah, in fact, exactly the opposite, probably. Now that I think about it, we can now even easier come across new forms of money.
I think the rise of Bitcoin in 2011 was Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, and whoever this individual is, he, she, or they, because we don't know exactly who this person is, right? Yeah. Or people. It's very elegant what they were attempting to do, because the gold and silver market is manipulated. There is more gold and silver paper traded on the COMEX or other exchanges, especially out of London or Shanghai, than exists that have ever been mined.
Oh,
That's the same
interesting.
problem with the French saying, America, you don't have it all. Here's a warship, fill it up.
Exactly.
If everybody
exactly.
said, hey, I've got some paper.
It's kind of like it'd be like a rush on the banks of gold. It'd be like, does it all exist? Is it all here?
The United States has 8 metric tons of gold. And it's the largest reserve of gold in the world. Now, it's for the amount of dollars that have been printed, gold should be considerably higher than $2,000 an ounce. It's a matter of valuation, right?
Right.
So people say there's not enough gold for all the money that's been printed. Yeah, it is. There absolutely is enough gold. We just need to raise the price.
Yeah.
Because that part needs to
Bitcoin
fluctuate.
seems to be where gold should be. And
Oh,
Bitcoin is
really?
not manipulated. It can't be manipulated.
It is the value it is the value of it being bought and sold that creates its value, right?
You think
and
there'll
it's finite amount. So there's only 27 million Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin was it started off at $2 a coin, maybe a little bit less, and now it's at 30,000, 35,000. And all of a sudden we started printing more money and Bitcoin started shooting up.
Oh, because it's maybe more accurately being reflected in the...
Absolutely, because it's not being manipulated.
Doesn't mean it's stable. I think there's a difference between being stable and being manipulated.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
And it would be interesting if they tagged gold to the value of Bitcoin.
That would be really interesting.
There was an interesting thing that happened in 1933, during the Great Depression, where the United States confiscated gold. So no one could hold gold bullion, unless they were, like collectible coins and stuff like that. And then they pegged the dollar 1 ounce to $27 or $41 an ounce at that time with gold to stabilize the markets, because we were on a quasi gold standard. And then in 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard, because he claimed it was called the Nixon shock. And basically he was claiming, we have to get ahead of the manipulators. This is only temporary. And in reality, all they did was replaced the gold, the gold-backed dollar, with oil.
The petrodollar?
The petrodollar.
Oh, okay.
And the way that Henry Kissinger did, or it was Henry Kissinger and a few others, I mean, I know it's going to sound a little conspiratorial, but you can actually look all this up, is they probably were having a conversation, well, why don't we just require trade in oil that has to happen in dollars?
Oh, and that's what keeps everybody using the dollar.
Well, the problem
some kind
is
of balanced commodity to it.
It became a challenge for the United States when we started waging war in the Middle East with Iraq, because Iraq originally wanted, they said, why should we trade, our oil for dollars when we could do it with euros? And then all of a sudden we invade Iraq.
Or
Libya, who wanted to trade it with their oil with gold. I mean, these are historical things these are conversations that people are not having. And it really comes down to how we use the dollar and how we use the dollar to control other nations that don't necessarily fit within our cultural context of democracy.
And do you think Putin understands this and has an idea of how to counter or work against or work with or...
Vladimir Putin's a very smart man. He began, lowering Russia's debt, began buying gold, and held $700 billion in foreign reserves. What he didn't expect was, when he invaded Ukraine, number one, that Europe would be united as much as they did, that NATO would automatically expand by 2 more countries. I mean, there's some issues with Turkey right now because of issues with Sweden and Finland joining NATO and stuff like that, but that'll be all worked out. What the risk that the United States did, and this has really raised the eyebrows of a lot of countries around the world, and if you look at the votes in the UN and how many countries abstained, is shocking because now we've weaponized the dollar. We will not allow Russia to use dollars, period.
That's right. Yeah.
And we're the reserve currency of the world.
Yeah.
And so this may be the United States' last hurrah. What happens next? Using our currency as a weapon, even though we've done it before, but not this extreme.
It kind of erodes some trust in it if we weaponize it.
And that's the thing, because our money is based on trust.
Yeah.
It's, the full faith and credit of the United States.
I could see any other country being like, well, if they did it to them, they could do it to us. It's,
and China's the big one.
I would think China.
And that's why the Chinese, not 10, 15 years ago, they began encouraging their population to buy gold.
Really?
Because the Chinese love buying gold. Gold is part of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's shiny, it's beautiful, it's religious, it's spiritual.
Yeah.
It puts them closer to their gods. It's really, and this is, gold around the world has been the metal of the gods because it resembles the sun. The sun is the giver of life.
We've gotten so far from that in America. Like for, I don't know, personally, as like a female, I'm like, oh, silver or gold. Like, oh, I guess I'll just match my gold to my gold today. That's literally the only relationship I have with it.
You don't have a spiritual moment with it every day before you come to work.
There's nothing.
And I love silver. I wear a lot of silver.
I know, you couldn't be more opposites, because that's Paco loves
Normally I wear
talking
silver.
about it.
I do
like this podcast, So.
There's a great saying: gold is the money of kings, silver is the money of gentlemen, debt is the money of the poor.
It is a weird thought because it's the gold atoms. They're probably the same ones. They've just been melted down and stuff and passed through.
Oh yeah, that'd be so interesting to
so
see
many
where
years.
gold was.
Yeah.
Like what was it part of 1,000 years ago?
Sure, some of those gold atoms might have been on a crown or something in some other part of the world, and it moves around the world so much that you never really know
where it was mined from. Would be really interesting.
And it merges together and stuff.
All of the gold that's ever been mined is still in circulation, with the exception of some of the stuff that fell in, sunk.
It's still somewhere in the world. We'll dig it up later.
Yeah.
And some of there's a mine in South Africa. I mean, 4 kilometers down.
Oh my gosh.
Just to find this.
Or there's boat. Have you heard there's boats that have sank, and then the money's as they traveled across the. Is that like World War II or something? Like where the submarines were destroying a lot of gold as it traveled?
Well, there's the rumor that two submarines. Well, there are two Nazi submarines or 2 German submarines ended up in Argentina right after the war, and they believe that they were laden with German gold, escaping to South America. Wow. There is also the very famous case of the Santa Maria de Atocha, which was a Spanish galleon that sank off the coast of Florida. And, they had to, the federal government got some of the money, Spain got some of the money because it was part of their property, and then the guys that found the Spanish galleon, they got some of it.
Yeah, you'd think they get a little bit of it.
So, and there was confiscations. As a matter of fact, there was another famous ship that sank also that the Spanish... they were demanding the gold back, and the Peruvian government got involved, and they lost the case. And the only reason why the Spanish won it was because the federal government, the U.S. federal government, said you can have the ship and the gold back, but we want a certain painting to be returned.
Oh, jeez.
You have to look it up. It's really interesting how gold still plays a very important role. Unfortunately, Americans have lost the understanding of the value of gold and silver.
So you want to see Joe Biden up there being like, got a gold ring. I encourage all Americans to start I have a gold toilet now.
If I don't give out financial advice, I can't. I'm an anthropologist. I look at it through the eyes of that.
Yeah.
But with silver at $22 an ounce,
Good
buying.
Deal.
Yeah,
It's
a great deal.
It's comment about confiscation kind of made me think about the Russian oligarchs, and I was sort of hearing these things that they've been taking yachts from them. And I also don't totally understand what makes an oligarch different from just a super rich American. Is Bill Gates kind of an American oligarch, or is it because that's separate from how Russia just functions as a society? But I'm just curious about sanctions and Russia and oligarchs and any thoughts you have on the relationship to money and how those all fit together.
It's really interesting. The Russians historically have always looked at their society through the lens of two types of people. You had the Tsar and the aristocracy, okay, and then you had the serfs, and the serfs were everybody else. And I know it's a very touchy subject right now, but Russians, the Russian elite, the way the Russian ran themselves as a government, and the relationship between their government, whether it was Tsarist, Soviet, or Putin today, they see their population as expendable, whether they were serfs, or slaves. Basically, if you were a serf and you worked for a landowner, you could not. You were indentured to them in perpetuity. If you had a child and they were born on that land, they had to work for that landowner. They couldn't leave. There was no mobility.
Wow.
They had among the caste system in India, at least you knew where you were at, but there were multiple
Many levels.
instead of just
the binary
two,
kind
right? What ended up happening and why we had the rise of the oligarchs is these individuals were the ones who were running Soviet industries, and they were able to.
Oh, gotcha, because it was government owned.
They were government owned, and they were the ones who were able to.
So it's like a telecom or something. Government builds it, then gives it to a certain group of people, and all of a sudden it's never free market.
And a lot of the oligarchs were already getting rich off of the Russian industries because they were skimming off money from the state.
Okay.
And so who were the ones in Russia could afford to buy these industries? The people that were already running them and making money. And looking at what's happening in Russia, Russia should be the richest country in the world, but the distribution of wealth is so lopsided.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not good for growth.
No, I worry about it all the time. Yeah.
I mean, the oligarchs are it's almost beyond
for sure,
filthy rich.
Yeah.
And so they have an enormous amount of money because a lot of it's been skimmed from corruption. I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, and we always grew up understanding that Russia, had their military was equal, if not better, than ours. Mm-hmm. And then we see the invasion of the Ukraine, and we see how Russia has failed, and that's because Vladimir Putin wanted to modernize his military, and we were under the idea that he was doing that. But what we failed to look at was the corruption within both the military and the Russian military-industrial complex, and the amount of money that was being siphoned off for what should have gone to, research and development of great military equipment.
Although it's probably nearly impossible, would you say the best thing Putin could do, or the future leader of Russia would be, to somehow confiscate from the oligarchs 90% of their wealth and somehow redistribute it? Or is that just not, or I don't know.
The thing,
not that would actually happen, but
the thing with Russia, if you look at the history of Russia over the last 800 years, it's going to be they've never had democracy. They don't know what that is. They've always had very strong,
Soviet heritage,
autocratic, whether it was Tsarist, Soviet, or the current incarnation of the Russian government. It's basically the same. It's like it's
you can't
lipstick
just
on a
change
pig.
Something like that and expect a culture to actually change if the people grew up differently.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're not. The Russians aren't serfs today,
right,
per se. But look, they can't protest.
That inequality is still there.
Inequality is huge. I mean, the wealth gap between the oligarchs and the population, and again, it's their relationship with money. Corruption is very common in that culture. It's just the way it is. I mean, we look at Tsar Nicholas, and the history of the Romanovs and their relationship with money, and how they worked within the system of the aristocracy, and how the aristocracy worked with the czars. And we look at the French Revolution as well, is a perfect example of the aristocracy in France could not work, and they didn't pay taxes.
Well, what if we don't look at it in terms of like confiscate from the rich and give to the poor, but more in terms of like a debt jubilee or something that would be kind of a reset where people can start on equal footing every once in a while? I know you had something
I think
related to the Bible that might, or like a historical thing.
If we look at it, for instance, among Muslims, let's look at Turkey, for example. Turkey's having a type of hyperinflation, right? The way we kind of control inflation is by raising interest rates. But if you're using Islamic law or Sharia law to try to, say we can't raise interest rates because that's against Sharia law, because that's how President Erdogan of Turkey sees it, that's great, but it doesn't work in an economic sense because it's never been tested, or it has been tested, but it doesn't work. Oh. We all know the way we control inflation is by raising interest rates.
Right.
Because that helps increase the value of that currency. We raised interest rates in the United States by 0.5 percentage point to try to slow down the economy. It was overheating and inflation's through the roof. And so, recessions are normal. In the Bible, in the book of Leviticus 25, it talks about there's a series of things that are commanded, a recommendation, such as, leaving the land fallow for a year, for 7 years. After 7 years, you leave the land fallow and you kind of take a respite. After, every 7 years, this is a 7-year cycle. And on the 49th year is a Jubilee year where all debts are forgiven, land is returned, slaves are freed.
Wow.
And, we don't know if that ever happened, but there are other societies that have had similar things. And I think at this point in society, especially after the pandemic, with enormous amount of money printing that has occurred, not just in the United States, but globally, inflation is going to be through the roof, of course. Plus there's supply chain issues, right?
Right.
So looking at what President Biden is attempting to do for college students, that could be seen as a type of debt jubilee.
Okay.
What would have been... It would have been cheaper for us to bail out mortgages during the 2008 and 2009.
Students, yeah.
Okay, instead of bailing out the banks.
Right.
I haven't, but
that's a whole
kind of makes
thing.
my blood boil, because wouldn't that have been? Is that wrong?
It would
feels wrong.
It feels wrong because our society says if we're going to take out debt, we pay that debt back, or we have the instrument of Chapter 7, Chapter 11, or Chapter 13 bankruptcy.
And it kind of takes that trust away too, because if you aren't going to be held to your debts, then I would see people going into more debt just because there's no guarantee that they'll actually have to pay it back.
Yeah.
Right, so they might take on more than...
So it's kind of like, well, I might not actually have to pay it back, so, I'll just...
And there's a control in that as far as our contractual obligations as seen through law.
Yes.
Right, so... Our society is based on laws, right? And a legal framework. That's why we make it difficult to declare bankruptcy. It's not something that is easy, and you can only do it once every 10 years. So, we hope that when you declare bankruptcy, it's a lesson, right?
Right.
Even though, the wealthy seem to do this quite often through their businesses and stuff like that. Donald Trump has declared bankruptcy many times. So again, our relationship with money is contractual, because when you look at a dollar bill, it's a contract.
Oh yeah.
Is the American relationship with debt similar or different than that of other countries? Like, are we more or less comfortable with being in personal debt than, say, like France or Germany or India, say?
Well, the Germans are debt averse.
Okay.
So they don't like debt, and that's because of their past experience, both by starting two world wars.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the hyperinflation, of the early 1920s.
Right.
Europe, Europe has been through so much. throughout their history. So what happened with this invasion of Ukraine is a shock to the system, because they're like, wait a minute, we're in the 21st century and this is happening now. And so we, all of a sudden now Germany is going to invest 100 billion euros into their military. Unheard of 6 months ago. Because the Germans they were bombed into submission. Same thing with the Japanese.
Yeah.
And now the Japanese are seeing the rise of totalitarian regimes, such as in China or in Russia and other countries, and they're afraid. So the democracies of the world are coming together. But we have some headwinds, and our headwinds are the huge amount of debt that's out there. If there's a guy that I follow very closely, his name is Mike Maloney, and he has done a great series of videos on the history of money and debt, and he talks, and he has brought several important people like David Morgan, and there's all the people here.
This pile of books
in
here.
This pile of books
that you brought.
And he mentions how we printed so much money, but we've exported our inflation.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So when the U.S. economy is doing well, there's economic disruptions around the world, because other countries are taking out debt in dollars, and they're trying to pay back that debt in their own currency, which is losing value.
Right.
So we've exported our debt. Well, guess what? Or we exported our inflation. We can't do that anymore because the entire global monetary system has been inflated, because literally the world stopped working for months.
Yeah.
But we were immune to hyperinflation because they used to buy our debt.
I don't think we're immune
Or we
to
used to be, as long as people were buying our debt. Or we'd be the last ones to hyperinflate since everyone else would go first.
If the world stopped using dollars, all those dollars would be coming back this way, and you will see a hyperinflation.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then that will be, the end of that'll be the end game.
And that'll change our relationship with money. Not having the US dollar will definitely change our relationship.
It's no different.
What would we do? We'd move to a digital currency or issue a new? Like, what would happen if the US dollar just hyperinflated? Like, from a cultural perspective, would Americans... we wouldn't just take the yuan or something. So what would we... We just make a new currency and start over?
I don't know. Would we go to a
or just
world
take Canada,
currency?
just like Canada's dollar or something and just share it?
Did you say that every currency has like a expiration? Like, there's no currency that lasts forever.
No, the average age
gold. Yeah, that's why you were talking gold, huh?
The average time frame of a currency is about 50 years.
That's it?
And no currency that's happened...
For that's all the little countries, though.
That's every.
Oh.
I guess that's the average, you said?
If you look at,
that's crazy.
The Spanish real,
You're totally
the Dutch guilder, the British pound, the American, we're at, from 1971 to today, what are 51 years?
How long is... Wait, we've had our dollars.
The euro. Isn't that one somewhat new? It's the new
Euro's the new one.
Yeah, we should just go to the euro.
Or the yuan. I think, and it goes back traditional for the Europeans. It's a topic of... It's taboo. Money's not...
Yeah, where is it taboo and where is it not?
The British hate talking about money. They find it to be classless. They don't like talking about it.
Wow.
It's a thing with them. It's, whereas...
You think that's bad? Should the government try to do PSAs and be like, hey, you guys should talk about money and make it more part of
No, I don't know about that.
Like, wouldn't it help the country, though, if people talked about it?
Yeah, is it a benefit?
I would think it'd be net benefit.
Think so?
Honestly, yeah.
I think what we need to do, though Americans are very comfortable talking about money.
Yeah.
I think we need to have a more in-depth conversation with our children and the next generation. Economics should be a class in kindergarten.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
I don't see why it
to
wouldn't
start
be.
teaching children about money.
No, it's true.
Not in high school, but from the youngest age.
Do you think the average adult American understands less about finance than average adults in other countries?
I think Americans as individuals understand money more than, let's say, our government.
Personal wealth. We got it.
Yeah.
And there's a movement.
But you're right.
There's a movement across, in some states that
are
making gold
Well, and I'm starting to find a lot of stuff on YouTube that I don't think I would have come across.
That's
younger,
the best part.
And
Yeah, that
I've
knowledge share.
I've always loved coin. My dad was the big stamp collector in the family, and I became the coin collector in the family. And I like silver coins, and I love gold coins. I don't have, gold coins anymore. I have more silver than anything else.
Okay.
And I like the shininess. I like the realness of silver.
The weight is amazing because it's just because anything that small, that
it's
heavy
shiny,
is sort
it's
of fun
pretty.
to hold.
Yeah.
But what's really heartwarming, especially for someone my age, who understands money, who understands the difference between money and currency, and understands the historic value of gold and silver and copper, right?
Yep.
Is to hear the younger generation, like yourselves, talking about, whether it's cryptocurrency, talking about gold, talking about silver, seeing more of that, seeing more of the chatter on YouTube and on Instagram and Twitch and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that are too complicated for the market mechanisms to effectively balance, right? Is that what happens? That's what it feels like. There's just too many layers and signals that are, I don't know, not really helping establish a baseline.
But it's also created things like Bernie Madoff. What he did.
That's true.
Well, when you said Enron, it's like they were energy trading. It's like they were inventing a whole new way to trade energy because it was always done by the state. So you deregulate it and they're like, oh, here's this whole arbitrage opportunity between how much electricity costs in different country or different states, and then we can instantly transfer it.
And they were
this is such a weird thing to like
cooking the books.
Yeah.
And they were hiding all of their debt in
and that's the real story. But
all these little off companies, all these little offshoots that they were creating. And so on paper they looked great, and the people that were making money were all the 200 executives. We're getting these huge bonuses. And that's not very much different than the oligarchs.
I think
nice.
That's interesting. I think on a smaller scale, like when you said like, is it better to talk about money? I think the more people talk about it and the more like education there is, like on a smaller scale, I think there'd be less fraud, because if there's more people like understanding how like money works, then they won't be kind of fooled into thinking like, oh, if I just give $1 to this person, or more than $1,000 to this person, I'll get $4,000 back next month. And I think the more you understand about money and how it moves and how it how it works, you're going to be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to fall for that, So I think the more education there is around it, it can only help, strengthen the people and not these, cons or other.
Well, and certain aspects of like understanding the time value of money, or just generally just getting your head around how a dividend can like exponentially kind of compound over your lifetime is just it's worth its weight in gold. Like it just is crazy to think about how, if you just miss that little piece of information and never take action on it early in your life, you can be in such a different spot when you retire.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think if you buy a coin today, a silver coin, for $22, and keep that silver coin for 30 years, what its value would be in comparison to what it was 30 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And to realize inflation could eat away at the inverse of it. If you keep dollars and they're inflating, they go the other direction.
And that's a big reason why silver coins in the 1950s and 60s were disappearing, because people knew that the value of the silver in the dimes and quarters, the half dollars, was worth more than what the face value of the coin was.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So,
because it's actually made of something, worth more than something that it's worth.
Right.
Yeah, that's so odd to think about.
Yeah.
And so that's
like when you get a penny and it's like a rare pen and you're like, sweet, it's actually worth more than a penny, but someone used it as a penny, like than it is
so this
for
is
$1.
a silver dollar.
And that used to be something you'd exchange like $1.
I can use that. I can go to the store and use this.
Yeah, so you could sell it for $27, or you could sell it for $1.
Right. So it's worth $1. It's worth $1. So I can pay with it.
Yeah.
But
the person you paid with would instantly swap it out for $1.
Exactly. So the cashier would see me. Let's say I had a pocket full of these silver eagles, right?
Yeah.
I'd go to the store and I would buy, let's say, how much is a Snickers bar? $2.25, I think now, one of the big ones. Sure. And so I would pay with 3 of these, right?
Yeah.
And people would look at this and like, wait a minute, this is worth more than That's what happened with
Yeah.
a lot of the silver coinage in the 19. But we were debasing the currency at that time.
Yeah.
So people were keeping the silver because it was worth more than what.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
But it's also illegal to melt them down. So it's almost kind of like, well, there's nothing else you can do with it at the same
Just-
time.
Oh.
It is?
It was a
I
type
think
of.
it's illegal to like.
Yeah, but
you can't
they're-
damage the money.
You can't
right.
damage the money. So if
Right.
you can't just be like,
no.
oh, I have a
So
bucket
you
of
would be like,
pennies.
but it's
I
so
need
much.
copper.
But how tempting would that be to
Right?
just be
But
like, government doesn't know I
What
have
did
it.
all
melt
those
it down.
people do back then? They hodled.
They
it.
melted it.
They
yeah.
hodled it.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So what ended up happening was that when I was in college and getting my bachelor's in 1998, I went to a cafe down on Maryland Park. It was called Cafe Copio, and I know the distinct sounds between a regular quarter and a silver, or a quarter that has silver content in it. It has a very distinct
You can hear it.
sound.
Really?
And I heard this, and I looked at
Like
the cashier and I said, "Is that silver coins?" And they were like, "Oh, this guy, his grandfather died and left him all this
Because it's more dense, so it must
silver
ring
money."
different, right?
Right.
And the kid was like, "Well, this is money," so he was paying for it. And so I spoke to the kid. I said, "Do you have any more of that?" He says, "I said I will give you, I'll give you for whatever you have. I'll give you a couple $100 for it." And he says, "Oh, I have a whole bag of it." And so literally I ended up buying all this silver
That's incredible.
at face value, and knowing that today I still have that silver. It's worth more than what I paid for it.
Right.
And that was
Yeah.
Wow.
over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working in retail, someone was shopping in the store. She picked out a dress and she's like, "Oh, it's a gift. Would you mind gift wrapping it for me?" And I was like, "Sure." So when we gift wrap something, we obviously take the price tag off, we wrap it up, we put it in a box, put a bow on it. And so I did all of that. And she was an Asian woman. I don't know what country she was from, but so I when I took the price tag off, I left it on the counter. And she's like, "Did you take that off?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I did that for you. No worries." She's like, "Why did you take the price tag off of it? Like, how does the person know how much I paid for it?" I was like,
No
Yeah.
way.
I was
Yeah,
that's
man.
interesting. Like, I was like,
Yep.
so like that, it almost like tells you how much you care for that person. Like I paid $100 for this dress. I didn't get you a $50 dress. I got you a $100 dress.
Because they want to.
So it's very like, it shows how much they actually cared. And I think in America, we think of like people, the care or the value of the gift is how much you thought about that, what that means to that person.
Right.
In that culture, it's like, no, it's how much I spent on the gift for you.
Right.
So
Right,
that's
because they equate that with the
And
time
here
and
it's
effort to
very
earn the money.
taboo.
and,
very
like,
taboo.
If we accidentally leave a price on a gift,
Even if it's a lot.
how embarrassing is that?
Very embarrassing.
I mean, it's like really.
paid
it's like
$5 for
we
this?
have
What the
panic
heck?
attacks.
You do-
I'm
and
like,
you know what's weird? Have
Yeah.
you ever looked at a card, like when you buy a card for somebody?
Oh, yeah.
There's always a price on it. You can't take that off.
Yeah.
I always thought that
No,
was so
you can't.
odd. That's
And
the
you're
one
like,
price you can't take
why?
off, and it's always a gift.
On the
You know what I
barcode,
mean?
like-
It's very
and
odd
some
to me.
people
Dude,
go
that's
as
what I'd be like,
far
you
as
paid $90 for this
scratching
card?
it off.
People
What's
scratch
that?
it
Some
off.
people scratch it off.
I would get
Really?
that.
I'm like,
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
tacky. I could see why you'd.
you
be
know,
like
and
that.
that's think of it.
Yeah.
We love to talk about money, but when it comes to gifting something and we leave
Gifting
the
is-
price, that's like the most taboo thing.
Very taboo.
But there are cultures out there that you expect to leave the price on there.
How do you think about time versus money? Like when you can exchange money for something like Grubhub and it saves you time from getting food, or employing someone to help you, or your time in school that you're spending for. Like, what's your relationship with time?
I think of it as,
Money.
what I would be doing otherwise, I guess. My dad always used to like, use this kind of example of like how much your time is worth, essentially. Like, oh yeah, like you could, go and like, I guess, save gas prices. Like whenever I see people in line to get gas at Costco and the line is incredibly long, and I'm thinking how much they're saving. They're sitting in line to get gas for 45 minutes.
Like cutting a coupon
and
or something.
Yeah, and they're saving, depending on how big their car is, $5. I'm like, so your hour is worth $5, right? That's what you're kind of saying. So like, I don't get gas at Costco for that reason, because in my head I'm always like, my dad, I hear my dad say, how much is your time worth? And then I don't do that.
I left a pretty well-paying, prestigious government position to go work at Zappos. And people were like, that's risky. And I said, if I don't do it now, I'm going to regret it later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
This
the
is the chance.
4.5 years I spent at Zappos, where I loved my job, I loved the people I worked with. I could could wear whatever I wanted. I was surrounded by llamas.
Yeah,
told you
it
that's
doesn't
where I
get
work
better
now.
than that.
But it was,
Didn't see you on that direction, but yeah, you're
and
right.
then
They were.
it was like we were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And,
you enjoy it.
but it wasn't work. I mean, it was
Yeah,
like, it
for
was,
sure.
it was a passion.
And that's where I'm
at
at
that
now. I
point.
don't know if you knew that. That's where I'm at.
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that
no,
place. Okay.
yeah. It's like,
Sorry.
no, I had a blast. And, and I was having, it was wild for me. And then now, after experiencing that, now I value the time I spend at work. That's why I started my own company, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm tainted for life. I could never go back to work a 9 to 5, and especially in government. Even though I did a little stint of government after I left Zappos, I was the art curator for the county, and I realized for me that having my own business is a currency. It's a money. It's maybe not going to make me rich, but it's the freedom.
Yeah.
And happiness ultimately is key here. To be able to have that flexibility, say, I'm going to go take a nap.
Yeah.
I could do that. I could do that. I could go and take a nap. I said, I'm going to go take a nap. Like, where are you going? To the nap pod.
It is weird though, because my happiest times, some of them were the hardest working that I remember too. It was because right out of college, I had a startup with people who it was working. Like we had software and people were buying tickets off of it, and we had service fees, and we made decent amount of money like right away. And the only thing we were thinking of is like, how big can we grow this thing? And then, we got investors, and it felt like money was not going to be a problem at all in my life. And then I spent with the team money like crazy, paying other developers, building tools that I thought venues wanted. And when it really came down to it, other companies like Eventbrite were doing it so much better than I was. And I built things I thought people needed without really doing the research, I think, to truly build the right thing. And, the company eventually spent all the runway and shut down. And I still had skills to get a regular job, but it was such a weird experience to have spent all of my 20s on this roller coaster where I just thought it just can only go up, or even if I get off at some point, it's going to be great, to like watching the whole curve come down and then getting my first job that's like 9 to 5. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm like in my 30s and I just got my first job of expectations. And and it was just like, none of it was bad. It was always a good experience. But the most fun was actually the building up, and even some of the falling apart was some of the most interesting times.
But some of the best startups happen, some of the founders of some of the best startups are all in their 40s. And that's the thing. I mean, look at Famous Amos Cookies. I mean, he was homeless. I am more comfortable with risk older because I look at it. Mine are switched, because when we were 20s, look, I'm a product of the 1990s rave scene. I took a lot of risks, trust me. A lot of risks. Blonde hair, candy beads, and lots of candy.
Very risky.
Gotcha.
But I've taken more risks now. And that has, but also I have an understanding.
Because you feel like you can calculate them more now?
But do you feel like it's
kind of
okay to
understand
fail?
what risks there were?
Oh yeah. And I've had a big influence, in my life, to be able to take those risks and to understand risk.
Okay.
But also being able to look at the world and see what's happening in the world and see, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah. And know that you're going to be okay at the end, right? Because I guess when you're young, you haven't experienced failure yet. So it kind of seems like it would be the end of the world. Whereas it was like, as you're older and you've experienced it a few times, you're like, oh, okay, well, I got back up. I guess I could get back up again. So you kind of, I assume that's, I don't know. I'm still pretty risk averse. Like, I mean, I've been at the same company.
Because when you imagine the fear of something,
like
it just hurts too bad to take the risk.
It's scary. It's too scary. Like, I mean, I would love to be an entrepreneur one day, but and I've had ideas and I was like, oh, I want to do this. But then the thought of like leaving my current job, which I love. So even that, I'd need something to kick me and really get me out there. But that risk to lose what I have and fail at something that I put all of that into is just, it's still too scary. I haven't experienced like something like that yet where I can be like, oh, I'll be fine. Yeah.
You'll be fine. You'll absolutely
yeah,
be
for
fine.
sure. With how many skills you have. And
I know. You'd be a great entrepreneur for sure.
And that's the beauty of American society and how we look at our relationship with our future and what makes our country great, and how other countries around the world try to emulate what.
So do you think that's built into the culture? And even if we hyperinflate, Americans will always just be inventing new things and building things and we'll figure it out?
I don't think we'll hyperinflate. We'll find a solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big difference between how we have been very successful in our society. We're resilient. And how we win wars. And I hate to bring it up again, but when you are too top down in your decision making, such as the invasion of Ukraine, right, where the decisions are being made from the very top. Now Vladimir Putin's making the decisions for his frontline people.
So rigid. It's
and
too rigid.
where
it's just not.
The Ukrainians have taken the American model that allows the sergeants and the captains on the front lines to make those critical decisions.
Yeah.
You know, Simon Sinek talks about it. You know, and Simon talks about it in one of his speeches about how, you know, pilots during the Afghan war would take risks or would target opportunities. The reason why that happened, why the commanders in Russia don't let their underlings do things on their own, is because then it threatens their
it's very ego-based, right?
You know, it's safety.
Okay.
It's safety, because with them, they're like, wait a minute, if we give the front line too much freedom, they may want to
Yeah, because what's all that? It's that kind of like scarcity, protectionist value.
Right.
You know what I hadn't thought about till right now when you made that comment was if I was Jerome Powell or somebody in charge of the government and money, it almost makes sense to just let the citizens figure out money. Like if you want to just let all this crypto stuff go, just don't get in the way, because I don't know where some guy in some basement
like a free market.
Well, you know,
a true free market America.
Well, it'd just be interesting. Be like, look at the dollar. You know, it's probably got a shelf life that's coming to the end, but America should be fine as long as we don't force people to like stop mining and we let them have the reasons to
learn their own lessons. Like, and I feel like we're learning a lesson right now. Up until very recently, crypto was just up, up, up. It was always just like diamond hands. That's all you heard about. And now, like, you see people who are just like lost everything or much of what they put in there. And I think, you know, when you only see people winning, more people join the game. They're like, I only see people winning, and now you see people losing, and I think it's making everyone else like second guess. Like, I never got into it, but like, I'm like, oh, now it looks even less enticing because we're learning.
You know what's weird is so I was pretty, especially with Ethereum and smart contracts, right? It's a programming language, and I thought to myself, this is amazing. Like years ago, I thought, wow, when we have programmable money, where money only can be used in sense of an oracle, where you say, I'm going to send money to someone when a temperature hits a certain degree, or when a certain amount of sales are done, or when somebody's in a certain location. It just opens up all these doors. And as hard as I tried to think about things that could be built, I never really thought about a stable coin. And then all of a sudden, this is like one moment I was like, stable coins are already starting to show up on the scene. And then I was like, wow, there could be like an entire mechanism of order books that keep something stable attached to something that's unstable, and people get value from like arbitraging the difference. And then I was like, wow, like, but it's crazy how sometimes it's like so obvious, and it just didn't click until someone built it. And I was like, oh, wow, that'll change the world. And I'm wondering if someone just ends up figuring out like, oh yeah, we can make currency like recession proof, or we can somehow do universal basic income, or we can do something that the governments don't need. We don't need wars, because this mechanism encourages, imagine like some kind of mechanism where going to war, say there was some sort of cryptocurrency that created value each year, and that automatically went to every country, and all countries use this. And if they were to militarize, it took that benefit away. And it just slowly became so valuable to not start a war that nobody started, like some kind of mechanism like that controls the actions we take as citizens. Have you thought about the relationship between people owning their private keys and having control of their money in a digital cryptocurrency in the same way that they would a gold and silver, you know, hold it in their hands, versus it being something that's in a bank account where they're KYC'd and they're sort of pseudo in control of it?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because
that'll change every culture's relationship with money when the citizens have confidence.
Absolutely. I think one of the frustrating things as a small business owner myself is the fact that I have to have a business bank account. And bugs me like to no avail. I work with a private bank here in town, and they refuse to have anything to do with cryptocurrency. Yet I have clients that pay me with Ethereum. Or other cryptocurrency. And they're like, so I had to...
You have to convert it all. And then
it's a nightmare. And then I can't tie my Coinbase account with my business bank account, even though it's business revenue. Now I have to go through, and it takes forever. So
I can see why companies don't take it as a currency. That makes a lot of sense.
It's the last transaction I did with a client was with Ethereum. All right. And all we did was just have we had our keys and the phones talk to each other, and it was instantaneous.
Right.
But I have to transfer that money to one bank account, which then takes 7 days to transfer it to the other. And I still have artists I have to pay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's almost like cash again, because when you lose your private key, it's gone. So it just makes me wonder how relationships have to be so different, because now you're the boss. Like, you're the boss of your money.
But
you can't hide.
Banks will go the way of the dodo.
Yeah.
I mean, taxes are going the way of the dodo thanks to Uber.
But the right software, we can all be our own bank. Like, we can charge interest loans and just like,
absolutely.
Here's one Bitcoin. That's just weird. Yeah.
I think that's
the relationship will have to change big time though in every culture.
Well, and it's generational. It's generational. I mean, millennials. There's 65 million millennials or 62 million millennials in the United States.
Yeah.
And you have. There's this. I'm lucky. I'm a Gen Xer, so we're the latchkey kids. And seeing the conflict between the baby boomers and the millennials, and how the millennials are looking at money, and how they, and they realize, millennials are, I believe, are smarter about money.
Give me a good breakdown of demographics, because that's just a fascinating thing. Like, what's different about old people versus young people versus the middle across all countries?
We are in a big societal change because of our relationship with money. And, the world right now is over leveraged. The value of our dollar or the value of currency globally is not what it used to be. And we are at a point, we're at an inflection point, very similar to where the world was in 1944, where, the fall of the British pound, the fall of the Dutch guilder or the Spanish real, we need to make a decision. And it's the older generation doing everything they can to maintain the status quo, and the new generation thinking outside the box. And it's a great time to be alive because we're witnessing it.
Yeah.
And for me, seeing what's coming as far as the younger generation, and kind of seeing the older generation kind of panic about it, and I'm in the middle, I'm like, I'm excited because as an anthropologist, I love observing culture, and I love observing society, especially during times of turmoil. Wow. Because there will be, change is constant and evolution happens quickly. And we just went through a global pandemic, which is cyclical. They happen all the time.
Yeah.
We weren't around. We weren't old enough to remember. But think of this. My mother was born in 1936. Her parents got married on January 1st, 1911. They remembered the last pandemic, okay?
Yeah,
and so
crazy.
Now I'm living through this one
with
my mom, who's 86 this year. Change happens rapidly, but it's a constant. And so I'm excited for the future.
But you would say on the big scale that when you think about getting off the gold standard and the Brettonwoods contract, the Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper will rank as a big shift culturally?
Yeah, absolutely. It already is.
Yeah.
I mean, look at El Salvador. I mean,
that they've accepted.
Yeah,
that's their national currency.
That's crazy.
Even though there's a little, this is cyclical. I mean, Bitcoin is down, but it will go back up, and I think it'll go up fast, But ultimately, look at. I hate to bring GameStop
Yeah.
You know?
Bro, make a trade right now.
That was-
being
that
in the
was-
that
was-
history books.
Are you?
Let me tell you, culturally, we're beginning to see societal change.
Yeah.
We are here to witness
That's
it.
true. I mean, it's a good example of a younger generation trying to take control from an old system.
Yeah,
with
they
their
don't
own
like the
mechanism.
old systems, the old, how money was controlled by big institutions. They don't like that, especially
Yeah.
Gen Z, and millennials too, I think. But yeah, they're trying to buck the whole system, I think.
Anyways, thank you so much, Paco. I appreciate you coming out. I
Pleasure.
definitely have my reading to do. And Ashley, thank you. I appreciate you coming out too. And it was a
you.
great conversation. Hopefully we'll have you back soon and keep talking about this kind of stuff because it makes everybody smarter.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure.
You.
All right.